Hey guys, what's going on? And today I'll give you my ranking of all 8 theatrically released live action Star Wars movies. Now, I've wanted to rank the Star Wars movies on my channel for a while, but my list is always changing, and I wanted to finish my series of Star Wars reviews first. But then I realised that it would be at least another year before that happens, and with the release of The Last Jedi, I thought that now would be the perfect time to talk about every movie in my favourite movie franchise of all time. I actually have ranked these movies on my channel before, but that was one of my very early videos, which is now privatised. And since then there have been more Star Wars movies, so I think this franchise deserves an updated list. And before we get started, I just want to say that I'm not necessarily ranking these films on how good I think they are, because nostalgia plays a big part in my overall opinion of these movies, but this is just a list of my personal favourites, so try not to get too triggered by my opinion. I'll also be talking about these movies in detail, so of course there will be spoilers, so if there's a Star Wars film you haven't seen, this is your warning. So let's get started with my least favourite. Now, this is the most recent Star Wars movie, and while I don't think this is technically the worst of the franchise, it just strays too far away from what I've come to love about Star Wars, and I just don't have a lot to say about it. I know it's a spin-off, so it's supposed to be different, but it just doesn't feel like Star Wars to me. There's no opening crawl, there's no Jedi, and there's no grand score by John Williams. It's just a little spin-off film that no one asked for, and quite frankly, no one was looking forward to. I mean, there is a reason why this story was summed up in The Crawl for a New Hope, because it's just boring. This whole movie is pretty much just set up for a much better movie that came out 40 years ago, which is why I've always thought of Rogue One as just filler until The Last Jedi comes out. The movie also jumps you around way too much. Almost every scene is set on a new planet, and by the time I got halfway through the movie, I was just completely lost. I mean, there is some stuff I like about the movie. K2SO was awesome. James Earl Jones is always great as Darth Vader, even though I don't think we got enough of him. But him having a castle on Mustafar is like the coolest thing ever. Like, he's constantly reliving his pain from his daughter Obi-Wan and fueling his dark side energy. And that final scene was just awesome, and it did lead up to A New Hope quite nicely. As did having Jimmy Smits reprise his role as Bail Organa, a bit of continuity with the prequels. I also liked how the movie really made you feel what it was like to live under the Imperial reign with the direction and the cinematography. It felt like a gritty war film, really. So yeah, I can see why people like it, but I just didn't care for the characters. Like Force Awakens, Rogue One still tries to be as PC as possible. I mean, come on, it's no mistake that there's a complete lack of white men in the main crew, yet the Empire has them in abundance. How convenient. The story was boring, we already knew what was going to happen because we've seen A New Hope. I think that there are some serious ethical issues with resurrecting dead actors with CGI, especially when it doesn't look too great and the character just didn't really have much of a place even being in the movie to begin with, and I just can't forgive the fact that Disney made The Force Unleashed non-canon so they can have this instead, which is why it currently stands as my least favourite Star Wars movie to date. As you probably guessed, I'm not the biggest fan of what Disney's currently doing with the franchise. I mean, this film's arguably worse than Rogue One, but considering that I don't really like either of these movies, I just think that this one has more entertainment value, and more importantly, it just feels more like a Star Wars movie. Unlike Rogue One, this film has an opening crawl, Jedi, lightsabers, a John Williams score, and even some of the cinematic techniques from the previous films are replicated quite nicely. But still, that doesn't detract from what I really don't like about this movie. For one, I was never on board with the idea of this film anyway. I think that the mere concept of an episode 7 undoes everything that the original 6 were leading up to, mainly the whole Chosen One prophecy with Anakin bringing balance to the Force and destroying the Empire. I hate how that it declared the EU, Expanded Universe, non-canon so Disney can give us their original vision, which really wasn't that original at all. You've heard it all before and it's true, this movie is basically a shot-for-shot remake of A New Hope, which doesn't make it feel like another chapter in the Star Wars mythos, but just a rehash of what we've already seen. And what makes this even worse is that it could have been avoided, because George Lucas actually gave Disney some ideas of how his sequel trilogy will play out, but they were all rejected. I mean, even if Disney accepted just one of Lucas's ideas, this movie would actually feel like an extension of George Lucas's Star Wars saga, instead of J.J. Abrams' fanfiction. It also sucks how the main goal of this movie is just to feed off the audience's nostalgia of the original trilogy by shoving familiar imagery in our faces and actively contradicting the prequels with having no politics, a plethora of unfunny jokes, overacting, as many practical effects as possible, an unknown cast despite the fact that they could actually afford experienced and decent actors. Oh, and Anakin's lightsaber is now being marketed as Rey's lightsaber, because I guess fans just won't touch anything prequel related, I guess. The planets were completely uninspired, Jakku was Tatooine, Takodana was Yavin 4, and Starkiller Base was just a cross between Hoth and the Death Star. Starkiller, where have I heard that name before? Oh, no, that's non-canon, that never happened. God. And an overly complex villain to the point where it's not even threatening anymore, just to spite Darth Maul. But most of all, I despise how Disney shoves its liberal feminist agendas down your throat, which by the way is the worst idea ever, because part of what makes the original Star Wars so timeless is that it didn't parallel anything that was happening in real life at the time, which adds to the escapism. But I guess J.J. Abrams just forgot about that when trying oh so hard to recreate the magic of the original trilogy. You know, going into the movie, I thought that Finn would be a pretty cool character. You know, a Star Wars movie from the perspective of a conflicted stormtrooper. He's not even conflicted. I mean, he's basically been brainwashed from birth to be a docile killer, but no, he just ups and decides he wants to be good, I guess. I mean, come on, what a waste of a potentially awesome concept. Oh, and apparently he can take on Kylo Ren. Yeah, a stormtrooper whose job was to clean toilets can take on an apparent Sith prodigy. And Poe? Poe only exists to complete the new trio. Heck, he doesn't even meet Rey. The filmmakers even said that he was supposed to die at the beginning, but decided to bring him back at the last minute. Which doesn't make any lick of sense whatsoever, since that would imply that Poe was alive on Jakku and decided to abandon his mission and return to the Resistance in hopes that a stormtrooper that he just met would find BB-8 and complete his mission for him. Okay, but really, most of the liberal crap that I hear about this movie can be summarised with the character of Rey, or Mary Sue Rey as some fans, myself included, have fondly called her. Possibly the worst Star Wars character ever conceived, and she's the main character. Seriously, I would rather have Jar Jar Binks as the main character of this movie than Rey. Why? Because she isn't even a character. She has no arc, no depth, no personality, no trials, no loss, nothing. She earns nothing. Everything is handed to her on a silver plate because she only exists to empower women and make women look good. And it's not very subtle either. The feminism is actually so on the nose that I actually thought it was satire when I first saw it in the cinemas. Like the scenes where she's like, I know how to run without you holding my hand, or I think I can handle myself. She just comes across as such a self-entitled, ungrateful bitch. Oh, and I so hate Rey knowing more about the Millennium Falcon than Han Solo. The scene where Rey's like, I bypassed the compressor, and Han just has that stupid look on his face where he's like, duh, I'm just a stupid white male. I don't know anything about my own shit that I've had for the best part of 40 years. And I don't know what the hell happened with her fight with Kylo. So you're telling me that a scavenger who's never handled a lightsaber in her life can fight and defeat a supposed Jedi prodigy who is not only a direct descendant of Darth Vader but was also trained by Luke Skywalker and Supreme Leader Snoke themselves? Seriously, there's nothing that Rey can't do in this movie which renders her completely hollow and unrelatable, unless you're like, I don't know, a stuck-up woman who sees Rey and is like, well, that character's perfect and I'm also perfect, so I can relate to her. And it doesn't help that Daisy Ridley cannot act to save her life. She is so over the top in every scene she's in, and you know why that is. It's J.J. Abrams trying to imitate George Lucas by telling his actors to go faster and more intense, but it doesn't work, it is cringeworthy. And what's Daisy Ridley's response to these criticisms? Well, listen to this. The Mary Sue thing is sexist because it's the name of a woman. I don't think there's something called Orion Craig. I honestly don't even have the strength to go into that discussion right now. I don't know if it's the acting, the writing or the direction, but someone did a bang up job of making Rey an intensely dislikable character, and the only way that I think she can be redeemed if she's somehow related to someone insanely powerful, maybe Palpatine, and if she turns to the dark side, which, from looking at previews of The Last Jedi, it looks like her character may go in that direction, so who knows, there may be some hope for this franchise yet. Right, now let's get into the things I actually liked about the movie besides the typical Star Wars-isms. When this movie was original, I actually really enjoyed it, like the attack on Jakku, practical stormtroopers, Kylo Ren stopping a blaster bolt, a bit of blood, it was great. I also like the escape scene with Finn and Poe. I think they showed great chemistry, which is why I'm on board with the idea of them being the first gay couple in Star Wars. I think they can make it work. BB-8 was adorable, the scene where he did the thumbs up with the lighter is the cutest thing ever. I like the character of Kylo Ren. Even though I think his insecurities render him a pretty non-threatening villain, his character is still very interesting and he looks awesome. I mean, there's no denying that he looks good on a t-shirt. I know, because I've got loads of Kylo Ren stuff. I freaking love Kylo Ren. He also had a pretty badass theme, to be fair. It did also make me really curious to who Rey's parents are, who Snoke is, will Kylo be redeemed, etc. And that cliffhanger ending did set up Last Jedi quite nicely, so it's cool to speculate about upcoming Star Wars movies since I couldn't before. Since all the previous Star Wars movies came out before I was even a fan. and even though this film does shove practical effects in your face just despite the prequels, there are some really nice visuals and action scenes which make it easy enough to sit through. But overall, it's hard for me to even consider The Force Awakens a legitimate Star Wars film, because every time I watch it, all I see is a high-budget fan film and Disney's cynical corporate checklist on how to appease original trilogy fanboys, prequel haters, and social justice warriors. It's a stale, uninspired attempt at rekindling the fire that was the original trilogy, when, truth be told, Star Wars died the second George Lucas signed it away and sold his soul to Disney. Anyway, now that my little rant on the Disney films is done, let's get on to the Star Wars movies I really want to talk about. The real Star Wars movies, episodes 1 through 6. You know, a few years ago, I think most people would agree that this was the weakest out of the original 6, but recently I've been hearing more and more people say that episode 2 is the worst, followed by episode 1. But for me, Phantom Menace has always been my least favourite out of the saga, mainly because it's just so separate from the movies that followed. But that's not to bash Phantom Menace. If you saw my review, you know that I'm actually really fond of this movie, but the main problem for me is that it really doesn't add much to the overall Star Wars story. It's a very small, contained film about Naboo fighting back against the Trade Federation, which in my opinion should have been Alderaan. But in the next movie, there's an entirely new conflict against the Separatists, and it's set 10 years after this film, so in the long run, Phantom Menace doesn't bear much significance in the grand scheme of things. George Lucas even said that when making the prequel trilogy, Revenge of the Sith was actually 75% of the story that he wanted to tell, and Attack of the Clones was around 25%, making the Phantom Menace feel like no more than just a prologue to the rest of the saga, you know, just a starter before the main course. I mean, the only reason Phantom Menace really needs to exist is to introduce Anakin to Obi-Wan, but I just think that was done really poorly. I think that having Obi-Wan train Anakin out of obligation was a stupid idea. I think it makes their relationship seem pretty hollow and meaningless, really. And obviously Phantom Menace has other problems. Darth Maul was cool but was utterly wasted. The movie had a problem with what character to focus on, creating a very muddled narrative. A lot of the characters were very monotone and stale, and no one really seemed to care about each other, and they tried to compensate for this with Jar Jar, but we all know how that went down. Qui-Gon Jinn was a great character, but his entire existence contradicts what Obi-Wan said in the original trilogy about Yoda being the one to train Obi-Wan. It introduces the infamous midichlorians, which does kind of cheapen the original concept of the Force, and the racial caricatures weren't very subtle either. But, even taking all that into consideration, there's still a lot to love about this movie. For one, we finally get to see what real Jedi were like in their prime and how they operated. The lightsaber choreography was awesome, especially in the final fight with Maul, which is still one of the best lightsaber fights in my opinion, especially when accompanied by Duel of the Fates, another epic score by the man himself, John Williams. I also like the cast in this movie, specifically Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor as Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, and I know that 9-year-old Anakin gets a lot of hate, but I think Jake Lloyd did a pretty good job with this role, and when I first saw Phantom Menace, I was 9 years old, so I could relate to him just fine. The effects really push the boundaries of digital filmmaking while still having some great practical work that George Lucas utilised to give us a wider scope of the Star Wars galaxy, with the likes of Naboo and Coruscant, whilst also expanding the already established planet of Tatooine with the pod racing and the more mature themes of gambling and slavery. And even though we all know how unpopular Jar Jar became, he was the first fully rendered CGI character, which led to the likes of Gollum and Caesar and the whole of Andy Serkis' career really. And I don't agree with people who say that this movie is bad because it was too political, or it didn't have the feel of the original trilogy because it was too clean or too sterile, because I think that's the whole point. It was supposed to have a different aesthetic to the original trilogy because this wasn't a lived-in universe like the original trilogy. This was, to quote Obi-Wan, before the Dark Times, before the Empire. And George Lucas even said that he started with episode 4 because he wanted to get the political backstory out of the way and get straight into the action, so we should have known what to expect. And you know what, I'm actually glad that George Lucas didn't succumb to what the fans wanted and stayed true to his vision, because I actually like the political stuff in this movie. Seeing Ian McDiarmid play Palpatine as a political figure instead of a straight up evil guy was really interesting, and I think it added another layer to his character and a level of maturity that I don't think the originals had. It kind of had a House of Cards in space sort of vibe. But I'm not going to dig too deep into this movie because I've already done like a 40-minute review of The Phantom Menace, and there are countless other reviews on the internet, so I'll just say that you can nitpick it until your heart's content, but in the end, it's an easy watch and a fun time due to the spectacle alone. It adds a fresh layer to the saga, and it kept me as entertained as any Star Wars film should, which earns it a spot above the Disney films for me. Now, like I've already said, the majority of Star Wars fans consider this film to be the worst in the franchise, but I don't see it. I've always thought of Attack of the Clones as not only an improvement over Phantom Menace, but just a pretty awesome Star Wars movie on its own. For one, they cut down Jar Jar by a lot and relied more on character banter for the humour, which I think was a wise decision. They held back on the racial stereotypes, thank God. The story actually felt relevant to the saga, like it was actually setting up the events of the original trilogy. Having Anakin and Obi-Wan split up on their separate missions gave us a great scope of the galaxy and some good world building. And it introduced the Clone Wars that fans have been anticipating since the original back in 1977. It introduced Jango Fett, who I actually think is better than Boba Fett. Yeah, he doesn't look as cool and he doesn't have the same cult following as Boba, but Jango was more fleshed out and just more efficient at what he did. Along with the clone troopers, who I also think are better than stormtroopers, because they're not just bumbling idiots, they're actually elite trained killers. I also think that a lot of the performances from the Phantom Menace were much more fleshed out here, especially from Natalie Portman and Ewan McGregor. Padme isn't a blank slate anymore, she's now a badass with some personality, and Obi-Wan felt a lot more like the Obi-Wan we knew from the originals than he did in the Phantom Menace. And even though I don't think that Anakin and Obi-Wan got as much screen time together as I'd like, I think that Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor shared great chemistry when sharing the stage. Samuel L. Jackson got a lot more to do here. We actually get to see Mace Windu kick some ass with his purple lightsaber. It introduced the CGI Yoda, which was 100 times better than the stupid puppet they used in Phantom Menace. Now he could actually move around and show emotion. With the exception of Duel of the Fates, I think that the score was another improvement over Phantom Menace, and just one of the best in the franchise really. It was very experimental in comparison to the others, with its use of guitars and drums, and as a result it includes some of my favourite Star Wars songs to date. And the sound design was so on point. There are so many distinctive sounds for the creatures and vehicles that really piece the world together. Maybe even, dare I say, Ben Burke's best work in the series. And not just the sound design, the design of everything. The costumes, creatures, locations, it all oozes imagination and creativity, unlike the Disney ones. And this movie pushed the boundaries of digital filmmaking even further than Phantom Menace did by being the first movie to be entirely shot on digital cameras, which soon took the world by storm. And it did use more CGI than its predecessor, but I don't know if my nostalgia goggles are fogging up or not, but I rewatched this film recently and apart from one or two shots, I think it's aged really well. That final battle on Geonosis was pure Star Wars magic in my opinion, and a lot simpler than Phantom Menace since that film had 4 climaxes and this only had 1, the Battle of Geonosis and then the lightsaber duel, which again I thought was the right direction to go in. And speaking of the action, I think that this film has some of the most diverse and visually dazzling set pieces in the entire saga. And of course the introduction of death sticks, and come on, who doesn't love the death stick scene? But with all that, I'd be lying if I said this movie didn't have a shit ton of problems. Although the first thing people usually go for when trashing this movie is the love story, but I have to admit, I kinda like it. I don't mind the melodrama or the cheesy dialogue. If anything, I find it refreshing to see a modern-ish blockbuster take a more Shakespearean approach to the romance, instead of the cringy hipster shit we've got nowadays. And you can't deny that that love theme was great, even better than Han and Leia's theme in my opinion. Personally, my problem with the love story is just the whole narrative. I mean, Padme set up to see Anakin as a child and even rebuffs all his creepy advances, but suddenly she's all over him. It just doesn't make much sense. It doesn't feel earned. Oh, and Padme just shrugging off the fact that Anakin mercilessly slaughtered an entire village is just like a complete no-go. I mean, isn't Star Wars supposed to be a children's franchise? What kind of message is that sending out to kids? Remember kids, if she's really the one, she'll stay with you even after you've murdered women and children. So when it gets to that scene where she's like, I truly, deeply love you, I'm just like, what? That guy's killed kids, how can you love someone like that? And what's even worse is that in Revenge of the Sith, when Padme finds out about Anakin killing kids, again, she's like, not Anakin, he couldn't. You've clearly forgotten about this little incident then. But, with that said, Romeo and Juliet is known as one of the greatest love stories of all time, and in that story, Romeo was also a murdering psychopath, so why is this any different? But I never liked the whole subplot with Anakin and the Sand People anyway. It was always my least favourite part of the movie. Like, you can't have Anakin murder children and then pass him off as some war hero. It just doesn't work for me. I think that should have been the moment when he fully turned to the dark side, because you can't just come back from that. It was pretty cool though to hear Qui-Gon's voice pleading Anakin to stop. It kind of sets your mind racing to what's going on. And along with the love angle, Attack of the Clones introduces the stupid idea that Jedi are forbidden to form emotional attachments in a feeble attempt to get us to root for this romance. What, so Jedi are supposed to train younglings from birth but aren't allowed to be emotionally attached to them? That's so dumb. And even though that I actually like Hayden Christensen in this role, Anakin just isn't very well written here. You can really tell that Lucas felt the pressure of how to write this character, since he's such an integral part of the saga, because Anakin's character in this film is just all over the place, and the only thing that's really consistent about him is how much he bitches about Obi-Wan, because Lucas just couldn't figure out what kind of character he wanted him to be. I mean, his complaining is kind of warranted at some points, but he does it way too often, which doesn't really scream Darth Vader to me. But, even though he's a bit poutier than how I'd imagine a young Darth Vader to be, I still found Anakin as a character to be very interesting, compelling, and relatable. Also, I know I mentioned how badass the clones were, but the road to getting there was way too rocky. The whole Sifo Dyas mystery didn't make any sense, and is never resolved anyway. The clones are also completely digital, and like I said, I think the CG holds up pretty well, but sometimes it is very noticeable and distracting. Also, the Jedi just accepting the clones as a new army, despite knowing that the intentions behind their creation were very shady, was a really stupid decision, as was letting Anakin go out on a romantic trip with the woman he's been infatuated with since childhood, despite knowing that his emotions were already unstable as they were. The final lightsaber fight was also a big disappointment, especially in comparison to Phantom Menace. I think George Lucas missed a massive opportunity here to show off Anakin's abilities and why he is the chosen one, and we do see a little bit of that, but he starts off the fight by getting electrocuted and then shortly after getting his arm chopped off. Oh yeah, and Yoda having a lightsaber is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. It completely clashes with what he taught us in Empire Strikes Back and renders him a complete hypocrite. And even if this didn't completely contradict what his character represents, the fight doesn't look good. It looks like a green blur and an old man swinging a glow stick at the ground. I do have more to say about this movie, both positive and negative, so yeah, Phantom Menace may be superior when it comes to the lightsaber fight, practical effects, and a more natural relationship between Anakin and Padme, but in terms of the action, spectacle, character, humour, story, music, scope, and world building, I think that Episode 2 trumps Episode 1 in all those departments, and although I've torn it apart here, I thoroughly enjoyed it as a kid, and I really enjoyed rewatching it recently. I'm actually kind of tempted to place this a little higher on my list, and if I was ranking these on entertainment value alone, I probably would, but to place Attack of the Clones above an original trilogy movie would just be sacrilege.